Good morning, America. How are you? How are you, America? As for me, I've got a lot on my mind, and I got a lot of thoughts swimming around in my head right now, and I'm trying to articulate, communicate them, clearly. As you know, the hardest part about making a YouTube video is getting past the first 30 seconds, I've heard them say, So anyway, this is me stumbling through the first 30 seconds trying to find my footing. So to start, I suppose I'll just start at the beginning. The beginning, like I said, well, my name is Zane, and I'm a narcissist. Okay, I'm a narcissist. I'm a classic narcissist. You don't have to take my word for it either. If you don't believe me, you can just watch my last videos, and you can just readily ascertain by watching my videos how much of a narcissist I am. Total narcissist. I'm also an Aries, so I got that going for me too. It's double whammy. So I'm sitting here 2 or 3 days ago in my living quarters, and I'm fed up, I'm pissed off, and I'm angry. I'm experiencing the emotion of anger in a big way. The other day, a couple days ago, I was sitting around. I felt like a caged lion. Just pacing around my living quarters back and forth, just huffing and puffing, full of piss and wind. Angry, just keyed up. Needed a vent, needed to get it out of my system, or else, this thing's going to spiral into a narcissistic rage. And as a narcissist, one narcissist to another, if fellow narcissists out there, you know that feeling when you get that feeling where you think you just can't put that pin back in that grenade no matter what you fucking do, and you start coming unglued. Well, that's where I was coming unglued a couple days ago. So what do I do to relieve stress? Well, historically speaking, I would ride my motorcycle. Okay, got this old antique motorcycle. I used to ride that thing all over the place. I'd tear ass all over the country on that motorcycle. I'd relieve stress that way. I would just treat that motorcycle like it was a mechanized punching bag. I would just raise hell on that thing. So that was how I would relieve stress. Current events being what they are, my motorcycle is currently inoperable due to a mechanical failure. All right. So the motorcycle's not an option. I can't vent my frustrations with my motorcycle. I'm sitting there just resisting the urge to punch holes in the fucking walls. So I've got two other options. I can either fucking stay home and punch holes in the walls and make a fool out of myself, or I can take a long walk and clear my head. So, thankfully, voices of reason prevailed, and I exited the house. I vacated the premises. I slammed the door behind me and just started walking, and I walked, and I walked, and I walked. Angry, venting, just walking, brisk pace, just, and my heart rate was accelerating, and my breathing was deliberate and labored, and I was walking, and I was amped up, and I could feel my adrenaline spiking a little bit because my sympathetic nervous system was beginning to engage because I'm angry, and I'm walking, and I'm angry, heart's throbbing, mouth is dry, looking for a fight, just wanting to destroy something beautiful. That was the state of mind I was in at this time, a couple of days ago, day before last. So as I'm walking, I'm ruminating, all right? What ruminating means, that's a clinical term that psychologists use to describe rogue, random, runaway thoughts. Ruminating is akin to daydreaming. Ruminating is like daydreaming, but ruminating as opposed to daydreaming tends to be centered on negativity. So I'm walking and I'm ruminating. And I'm thinking awful, terrible, heinous thoughts. Just wanting to start a fight. So I'm walking, get out to the boulevard. There's light to moderate traffic that day, and I'm standing on the sidewalk. And as I'm standing on the sidewalk, catching my breath a little bit, I find myself standing there, staring at passing motorists as they drive by down the boulevard. Like I said, light to moderate traffic. I'm standing there like a crazed madman, staring at the cars as they drive by, staring at them like I'm some kind of a fucking ghoul. And I'm looking for a truck, because my thought process was I wanted to start a fight with some old redneck boys. All right? Before I go any farther, I want to emphasize the fact that I don't condone violence. Having said that, I also hold kindness as my core value at this time. These days, I hold kindness as my core value. But anyway, as you know, if you're a narcissist and a rage monster, you know how it is. Sometimes those are just words. You can say you hold kindness as your core value, but when you're pissed off, you want to destroy something beautiful, kindness just goes right out the fucking window. So my intention was, mind you, I'm ruminating. rogue runaway thought. I'm waiting for a pickup truck full of good old boys to stroll by, to come cruising by. I'm standing on a sidewalk on this boulevard waiting for a pickup truck full of good old boys. So I was going to do, my intention was to take that rock and fucking jump out into traffic as that pickup truck approached and just pitch that son of a bitch rock right into their fucking windshield. That's right. That was what I was going to do. That was what I was planning. That was what I was ruminating about. As I said, I'm not a proponent for violence, but in the moment, I truly wanted to hurt something. So you can imagine good old boys driving in their big old diesel truck, their four-wheel drive, their obnoxious diesel engine with all that fucking ridiculous smoke. Those guys, good old boys, sloppy big white boys, t-shirts with cut-off sleeves, So anyway, they fucking driving down the street, coming back from the store, probably get a six-pack of beer and some cigarettes, they're just minding their own business. All of a sudden, that fucking rock smashes into their fucking windshield. So what do? Well, the first thing they do is they slam the brakes, and sure enough, that big obnoxious diesel pickup truck comes skidding to a stop right there in the middle of traffic, right? You don't have to use your imagination to find out that, you can just see them. You can just see in my mind's eye. I can see the doors of the pickup truck. They kick the doors open to that pickup truck after it comes screech to a halt. And they come out of that pickup truck, and they're also looking for a fight, these big old redneck boys, like I said. So they come out of that truck, they just spill out of the cab of that truck onto the street, and they stand up tall and rigid, and they start flexing. They start talking shit. Meanwhile, while they're flexing and talking shit, I trot up to the tailgate of that truck and I grab a hold of that MAGA flag. You know the flag, that fucking obnoxious MAGA flag that's commonplace on the back of these redneck boys' pickup trucks. Well, I take that flag by its mast and I break that son of a bitch right off at its base. And I imagine taking that son of a bitch's stick and beating the living piss out of those bastards one by one, starting with the biggest one to work my way down to the smallest. That's what I was thinking. That was my intention. And if that had happened, if that would have occurred, that would have been a classic example of a narcissistic rage. But I didn't slip into a narcissistic rage that time. Instead of plummeting into a narcissistic rage, I was able to maintain instead of going all the way out of instead of losing my mind totally, I was able to rein it back just a little bit. And as opposed to being in a narcissistic rage, I found myself what I call a narcissistic death rattle. Anyway, there I am, ruminating, standing on the side of the road, on the side of the street, on the sidewalk, just about to lose it, just about to go berserk. Suddenly and without warning, from origins unknown, I hear voices in the back of my mind, all right? I hear voices. And these voices were the cumulative voices of my deceased ancestors. And what my ancestors in that moment were communicating to me from wherever, from origins unknown, they were saying to me, cumulatively, they were crying out in unison. They said, Zane, you better keep walking, son. You better keep walking. So that begs the question, did I heed my ancestors' advice in the moment? Well, yeah, I did. Begrudgingly, I'm standing there on the sidewalk, tight, rigid, angry, agitated, hostile. So let's do a forward march, and I just start walking. I'm walking, and I'm just amped up, and the adrenaline is surging through my fucking bloodstream, and I just want to hurt something. Just walking, kept walking. So anyway, make a long story short, it's hot, it's summertime, July, and I got myself exhausted. I walked so far while I finally exhausted myself. I burned myself out. So what do? I found myself at the local city park in my town where I live. I made my way to the local park. So what I did is I planted myself underneath a big, tall, shady oak, not an oak tree, a pine tree. I planted myself up against a pine tree. I just leaned my back up against that wood and had my feet dangling out in front of me, spread apart, So I'm sitting there. Parasympathetic nervous system is kind of activated, and I'm kind of coming down slowly. I just sit there in the shade next to this tree. Lo and behold, as I'm coming down from my adrenaline surge, I notice this lone, stray daisy flower. So a daisy, a daisy. white little petals, you know. The petals were still kind of curled down underneath, you know, because the little daisy flower was sitting in the shade all morning, you know, waiting for the shadows to recede so he could absorb some of that, you know, mid-afternoon sunshine the daisy was. That's all the daisy wants to do, is just absorb sunshine. That's all they live for. And in the moment, I envied that daisy. I envied it. Because you never see a daisy having a narcissistic fit. You never hear about daisy flowers going into a narcissistic rage. You know, there's no such thing as a narcissistic death rattle in the plant kingdom. So I'm sitting there, silence. Weather was nice, shade, studying this lone, stray, you know, daisy flower. Suddenly, without warning, I hear more voices in the back of my head, or originating from origins unknown once again. This time there weren't voices necessary. Instead, it was a baby. I heard a baby crying in the back of my mind from origins unknown. While I'm staring at this daisy flower, I hear voices in my mind. It's a baby, an infant baby, crying. You know, and just to be clear, it wasn't the kind of crying that indicated that the baby was in pain. You know, there's a certain kind of a pitch that a baby cry emanates when the baby is hurting or is teething or is wet. As opposed to that, this cry was different. This cry was more of a mournful, needy, kind of a yearning cry. Baby, infant crying. I hear this in the back of my head from origins unknown. The reason I'm telling you this is because I'm a newly minted grandfather myself. I just had my first grandchild last month. She was born just last month. So I've got, and my grandchild lives in Australia. And the thing about my grandchild is being a narcissistic bastard, back when I was in my 20s, me and the lady that I was with at the time, the mother of my child, we went our separate ways, and I made a, you know, I abandoned her. I abandoned my daughter when she was 4 years old, when she was still living in Australia. And I have to live with that now. Anyway, fast forward 25 years later, year of our Lord 2025, I'm sitting here underneath this tree in the shade, hearing, you know, I'm cascaded with I'm flooded with emotions in my mind as I'm sitting there resting. Thoughts of my firstborn child, you know, they were plaguing me. I was riddled with guilt. And I heard this baby crying, and I felt compelled to soothe this baby. And in the moment, I convinced myself that it was my actual granddaughter in Australia, and I was, you know, I felt like I was communicating with my little daughter, my granddaughter. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like I said earlier, I'm just riddled with guilt, and I'm flooded with emotions. Emotions are just cascading through my prefrontal cortex, and I'm overwhelmed with emotions. And lo and behold, I find myself kind of getting teared up a little bit. I got a little misty-eyed, and I'm thinking about this baby that I'm hearing, and I felt compelled to soothe this baby. So what happened was I found myself actually singing a lullaby to this little lonely daisy flower that I came across in the park. So here I am, I'm a little misty-eyed, you know, and I'm singing lullabies, and I'm remembering how I used to sing lullabies to my own daughter back in 1994. So I'm singing lullabies to this daisy, you know, and I'm just having a moment as it goes. And I can only imagine how much of I can only imagine what passersby must have imagined when they saw me, a grown man sitting under a tree weeping, singing to this daisy flower. So I'm sitting there singing lullabies to this flower, you know, fighting back tears, just having an emotion. But anyway, what happened was I felt better. It calmed me down. It broke the spell. It broke my spell, and that pretty much concluded my narcissistic death rattle. So, you know, moving right along, I gathered myself up. I got collected my thoughts. I got myself back together. I straightened up. I got myself sorted out, and I proceeded to walk back towards the house. So I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm just exhausted by this time, and I'm just kind of, my brisk, athletic stride was replaced by just a little. I was exhausted. I was beat. I was just. Anyway, fast forward. I'm walking, and I'm almost back to my living quarters. I'm almost back to the house. I'm walking down the side street that leads to our house, that leads to my living quarters, and I come up to this intersection. I'm walking. I'm a pedestrian. I'm getting ready to walk across this side street. So I turn my head over my neck to see if there's anybody come. I just want to make sure I didn't get run over by a car that was anticipating making a right turn as I'm walking into the street. So I turn my head, and as soon as I turn my head out of my eye, I see Dr. Torres. Lo and behold, of all people, I see Dr. Torres. She was driving home, and she was driving back to her house there, and she saw me, so she stopped, and she wheeled her 1992. She's got a vintage 1992 Isuzu Trooper. Dr. Torres does, and she gave me a lift. Quick parentheses: Dr. Torres. To be clear, Dr. Torres was never my clinician. Dr. Torres is she's a doctor of clinical psychology. She's a gifted clinician. Like I said, long parentheses, Dr. Torres has never been my clinician. Having said that, as events turned out, I'm down on my luck right at the moment, and Dr. Torres, through the goodness of her heart, she saw fit to let me stay in one of her small, tiny bedrooms in her house. So that's my situation now. I'm basically couch surfing, and I'm living and I'm Dr. Torres's spare room. So anyway, point is, when I'm on the drive back to the living quarters, I'm in the passenger seat, right? And Dr. Torres is driving, and she asked me, she says, well, what are you so mad about? Well, first of all, she asked me if I feel better, I calmed down, and, I told her, yeah, I fucking calmed down a little bit. I'm just exhausted, and I'm just tired. So anyway, she asked me, well, what were you so angry about? What were you so angry about? So naturally, I told her about what I wanted to do. I want to start a fight with some MAGA boys, and et cetera, this and that. And then, as we're driving, she asked me, she called and she said, well, so you're angry at the MAGA people, she says. And I said, well, yeah. And she says, well, why? So, as I said, Dr. Torres, she's a gifted clinician, so Dr. Torres knows all the right questions. And one of the questions she asked me was, she asked me, what are you so angry about? And then I explained, MAGA this, and the Constitution's being trampled on, and Donald Trump is just, and I was just going on and on, just explaining my grievances. So then, silent goes by, like a quiet silent, a couple of silent seconds, about a second, maybe 2 seconds of silence, And then she turns as she's driving, Dr. Torres, she looks at me, she says, well, you voted for Trump. How does that make you feel? Or something. So she asked me a question, how do you feel about voting for Trump in 2016? And another quick parenthesis, yes. In 2016, I actually did vote for Donald Trump. Just really quick, the reason, the deciding factor in me in 2016 casting my vote for Donald Trump was when Hillary Clinton declared that people like me are a basket of deplorables. I think she said that during her debate. Or anyway, Hillary Clinton back in 2016 referred to a large swath of Americans as a basket of deplorables, And that was it. I said, I'll never vote for anybody that thinks I'm a basket of deplorables. If I'm deplorable, then so be it. I said I voted for Trump in 2016. Fast forward, I voted for Biden next time. Then I voted for Kamala Harris, of course, for the second time around. But anyway, the fact remains, I voted for fucking Donald Trump. In 2016, I voted for Trump. And he turned into be I'm not going to preach about current events. You guys all know what the current status of America is right now. But Donald Trump's a domestic terrorist as far as I'm concerned. He wasn't back in 2016 yet. But even still, I knew better than to vote for Donald Trump. So I'm a self-loathing Trump voter, basically. And the reason I want to get into a fight with all those MAGA supporters is I just, I was just, in my twisted, conflicted mind, me starting a fight with MAGA voters is just a way of me kicking myself in my own ass. Self-flagellation, they call it, I suppose, in some parlances. So that concludes my anecdote of what a narcissistic death rattle looks like. One more thing before I call it quits, though. I encourage anybody that I offended with my comment about MAGA and good old boys and all that. If any good old boys out there have watched this and you're angry and you want to vent and you're pissed off at me, then I encourage you to drop a comment down below. Going a step farther, if you, speaking to my fellow narcissists out there, my fellow rage monsters, if you ever feel like you can't handle it, if you feel like if you need somebody to help you put the pin back in that grenade, drop me a comment. I'll talk you down because I've been through it. My name is Zane. That's all I've got for now. Adults of America Coalition, AAC. Stay tuned.